Broadcasting from the campus of Salisbury University, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7, putting Delmarva first. It's time for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
Republicans trounce Democrats. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. The 2014 midterm elections seemed almost a repeat of 4 years ago when the Tea Party emerged from the conservative movement, but this time there were no gaffes by some of the more conservative candidates, thus leading the GOP to control of the U.S. Senate. In addition, not only did the party hold on to some of its most endangered governors, here in the state of Maryland, the top office went from blue to red with the election of Larry Hogan over Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown. And here on the Eastern Shore, longtime Democratic delegate Norm Conway, chair of the Appropriations Committee, lost his bid for re-election to Republican Carl Anderton. In Wicomico County, it was a sweep for the GOP, with Republican Bob Culver defeating Democrat Rick Pollitt. In addition, the party won all of the contested seats on the county council. So what does it all mean? In our studio, we have our usual panel, Mike Prettle. He's with Wicomico County Democratic Party. And making a return engagement after a long absence, John Barkovich, the former chair of the Wicomico County Republican Central Committee, and Salisbury University political science professor, Michael Laughlin. So welcome to you all. Well, John, I need to go to you first. It was a big night for you. What do you make of the results? And have you are you like the dog that now caught the car? What's going on here?
Well, it's certainly Republicans are excited. We've had a great midterm sort of race, and we won some races that there were some severe questions about pre-election time. I think nationally, though, the tide was brought on by a lack of turnout or excitement from the weak Democrats and the independents for the things that the Democratic Party has stood for in the past. And so I think that played out well. The quality of the candidates that we put forward, Tillis, Ernst, I mean, these were good people who were honest and ran good campaigns. And the same thing happened here, I think, in Wicomico County to a certain extent. Norm Conway's district was changed, so there were some voters that had never voted for him in the past. And the candidate that ran against him was a good fellow with experience and won that election. County executive, I think the issues that Bob Culver drove in Wicomico County were the same issues that Hogan drove on the state level, in terms of we've got to do something about our state and our ability to improve business, get our economy going, and keep people in jobs. And I think that played well statewide with Hogan, and I think it played well in Wicomico County with Bob Culver, who ran a good campaign. And that's always what it comes down to. You have good candidates who run good campaigns, and you ride the wave.
Mike Prettle, how do you view this?
Well, on behalf of the Democratic Club, I guess I have to congratulate the Republicans for their victories. And perhaps surprisingly, I agree with most of what Dr. Barkovich has said. I think that the Republicans had some relatively good candidates. I think they ran very good campaigns. I think there was a degree of perhaps complacency on the part of some of the Democrats who have been in office for some time, and perhaps they didn't run quite as hard as they could have, and perhaps certainly the turnout was not what we had hoped for or expected. It was very difficult to energize the Democratic base, and we worked very hard, and we had some wonderful candidates. I mean, I was very sorry to see Josh Hastings go down. I think he's got a future, and there's other folks who I think have a future in the Democratic Party and can help the county substantially. But I don't. I hope that the new county executive will do what he says he's going to do to help economic development in the county. I am a little bit concerned about the environmental issues that I'm involved with personally, because we don't find quite as much sensitivity, if that's the right word, on the Republican side to protection of the environment in the county and in the Chesapeake Bay. But anyway, I don't think it's a landslide by any means. The vote totals weren't that far off, and we're all looking forward to 2016, and we'll see where things land then.
Michael Laughlin, how do you read the election returns? Is this something that's structural? Is this a wave? Is this a wave of the future? How are you reading this?
I think that Democrats nationally and certainly locally and state as well fell victim to the structural character of the midterm elections, where the demographics of the two parties, the constituency bases of the two parties are significantly different, and the Republican base is easier to turn out. It's much more white, whereas the Democrats are much more multi-ethnic. The Republicans are middle class onto the upper class. Democrats are middle class to the low income class, and the Democrats have a harder time turning that base out, and this was evident, I think, in this election. Again, I think the national figure was the overall electorate who came out to vote was 75% white, and again, that bodes well for the Republican Party, both nationally and locally.
John, yeah, go ahead.
I just the diversity that the Republicans have with Joni Ernst, with Kim Love, with Tim Scott, the concept of a bunch of old white guys in the Republican Party is really starting to fade. And I think I use this election cycle to say that we're really starting to see the payoff of appealing to a different subset of voters. And so, a 30-year-old young lady wins in upstate New York. We have an 18-year-old in Carolina to the state legislature, females. We have Joni Ernst, we have Martinez in New Mexico. I mean, the party is working hard to diversify, and they're doing that by finding good candidates outside of the old white guy realm. And I think this is the first cycle that we've seen that, and I'd like to see them continue that.
However, John, that's where I'd part company with you. Just by coming up with candidates, unless you change your principles, unless you change your goals, it seems to me. I mean, you had
candidates, diversified people who support our principles.
You had the governor of Alaska last time around, who you thought was going to bring on this tremendous Hillary vote, this tremendous female vote, and that turned out not to be the case. You can't just give lip service because you find a conservative African American or a conservative woman think that that's going to make all the difference in the world.
It's not lip service. They got elected.
But
they
the
ran good campaigns and got elected, and they ran on Republican
But
principles.
they did not turn out the minority vote for your candidates.
Let me go to Michael Laughlin, because one of the things that I noticed in the numbers, which may be an opportunity for Republicans, we'll see, is that that African American votes for Republicans was actually up. So was Hispanics, also
Texas
up,
in particular,
and also the Asian American vote was also up for Republicans. Now, what that means in the long run, I'm not sure. But Michael,
that begs the question that you brought forward, and that's exactly right.
Yes.
When you get 50% of the male Hispanic vote in Texas, then that concept of it's only white guys turning out in midterms is just called to question.
Michael, just real briefly.
I don't think that the shift is significant at this point, and future will tell. But the differences are not significant enough to suggest that somehow the Republican Party has now made a major shift in its appeal, and that it's much more appealing now to the African American vote, to the Hispanic American vote particularly, and certainly in terms of class as well. The working class folks are still, if you look at the income, they're still disproportionately voting Democratic. Right, and so at this, the other thing I would add, of course, is I think that the Democrats, they ran a poor national campaign. I think it's pretty evident now that the advice about running away from Obama was bad advice. I mean, you have a situation in Arkansas where the Democratic candidate for Senate, right, loses, right, but the Arkansas electorate votes for a minimum wage. And Obama has been pushing for a minimum wage. So you have this contradiction in effect, that the electorate says, we want a minimum wage, but we're gonna toss out the senator who might vote for a national minimum wage and vote in a Republican who guaranteed will not vote for a minimum wage. So there is that problem as well. But I think that the structural features of demographics really have not changed in any substantial way.
We've not really communicated the differences between the parties, and it's been too much a personality thing. But and I agree with Michael that
and that's the success of the Republicans, I'd say.
That's right. They've done a great job.
They vilified Obama, and they actually, it was interesting. They were able to demonize Obama and in effect separate him from the policies that he was pursuing.
That's exactly right.
That's because the American people were not in favor of the policies he was pursuing. They were opposed to Obamacare. The economy is in the tank in spite of everything he said.
They were opposed to Obamacare, but they favored all the pieces of it. So, yes. But I want to move on to something here.
I'm sorry.
But no, well taken. So where do we go from here on Capitol Hill? We had kind of almost two responses. On one hand, we had the future Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, this sort of magnanimous press conference. The night before, he had praised Allison Lundgren Grimes. And then we had the other face of the Republican Party, seen to me, House Speaker John Boehner just the other day, very fiery, talking about how the president should not, he would be playing with fire if he had some executive orders when it came to immigration. John, what do you think we're going to see out of Congress, and how are we going to see the Republicans govern? Are we going to see them avoid what the National Review called the governing trap? Where do you see it on a national level?
Well, there are a couple of things that the Republicans will do right from the get-go, and they will pass the bill to take away Obamacare, make the whole law go away, and of course that will be vetoed by the president. I believe there are a number of We have to remember that there are over 300 bills sitting in the Senate for the last 6 years, and for the last 6 years, nothing's come out of the Senate. And so now all of a sudden, the Republicans have the Senate, and we got to get things done. We've got to compromise and make the government work. The government hasn't worked for six years because the Democrats have been in control. I believe the Republicans will go forward with bipartisan bills that nibble at the edges from Obamacare, the economy, and I think that with bipartisan support, they'll start to put those bills on the president's desk, and then he'll be forced, when he either says yes, or if he says yes, it goes forward. If he vetoes it, he'll be held to the task of, why did you veto that? And the American people will then see that the things that they want are not being done because the president won't allow them to go forward. And I think that's where it's going to go. How much will get done? I don't really know, but that's how I believe the Republican strategy will be, so that when Boehner comes out and says, if you do an unconstitutional executive order, you're going to poison the well, I believe he's saying to the president, we are prepared to work with you, but if you do something as radical as that, forget it.
John, but the first issue up is immigration reform, where the president is saying, look, the Senate's already passed a bipartisan bill. If the House would even consider it, it would get passed. And so it seems to me he has thrown down the proper gauntlet to say, you talk about bipartisan, here's the first thing that you already did in the Senate.
So the one bill that the Senate sent that the House hasn't addressed, as opposed to the over 300 bills that the House sent to the Senate.
50 of those 300 bills
So we got
bills
one bill and 350, and it's the House's fault. No, I think something will be done on immigration. Has to be done because it is an issue the American people are concerned about, and it's really turned in the last 6 months. Amnesty, 2 years ago everybody was sort of in favor of some kind of amnesty, and then we see all these people coming from the South across the border, and they're going, this is not right. We see kids being warehoused. So I think the country is ready for immigration change. But the Republicans will start with secure the border, and they will go from there.
Michael, so how do you view this? Are we going to see governance, or are we going to see a continuation of the last 4 years?
I'm afraid it's going to be the latter. From the Republican side, it would seem to me that they could interpret this midterm election as giving themselves some momentum, and that the campaign of vilifying Obama has succeeded, and that in the next 2 years they could bet that a continuation of confrontational politics will work, and that so they can tee them up for a Republican candidacy for the presidency. Everyone realizes you got to win the White House in order to get your policy agenda through, and so Republicans, they don't want to continue this indefinitely. The situation, they want to win the presidency. On the Democratic side, I think the confrontational politics ultimately may work as well, right? Obama, I think my guess will be he's going to go through some kind of executive order on immigration, because that will be essentially awarding or rewarding the Hispanic American population. They talk about one of the constituencies that's going to be in play. This constituency can be nailed down if the Democrats, if Obama can deliver on this right now. So to galvanize Hispanic Americans for the 2016 election. There are all the other issues on tax policy, certainly on climate change, right? There's so little common ground, I think, between the two parties presently that nothing can get done under the present circumstances.
But let me just take one example. There's over $2 trillion out of this country because of the corporate tax rate. And if the Republicans and Democrats in Congress, both the House and the Senate, sat down and said, that makes no sense, we should bring that $2 trillion here, and let's reduce the tax for that money for the next 12 months. And they pass that bill, and it goes to the president. He goes, I'm not reducing any taxes, veto. Well, that's put him, he's not had to do that for the last 6 years. And when you say they vilify Obama, does that mean the Republicans had anything to do with Fast and Furious, IRS, Benghazi? Did they have anything to do with ISIS chopping off the heads and not responding appropriately? The Republicans had nothing to do with it. That's on Obama's shoulders, and the population says we don't like what he's doing. I don't think the Republicans vilified him. His own policies.
I'll give Mike just a little quick response because I want to pivot here. But go ahead.
No, I mean, I think it's unfair. It's an overstatement. I know a lot of the Republicans ran on Benghazi. I mean, all the polls show that the voters didn't respond to things like that. I think the IRS thing, from my own perspective, which it's one area that I know a good bit about. I think the whole thing is a complete sham. That IRS got caught doing what they're supposed to be doing with C4 organizations, and the Republicans have been trying to
C4 organizations.
The Republicans and Democratic C4 organizations too, including some that I represent.
There were two Democrats and 300.
John, the facts are the facts. But the point I'm making is not that one. The point is that the voters don't care or don't know about those things, and that's not.
They care about the economy, number one.
But they care about the economy.
The economy is number one.
To go back to your point, I mean, bringing back money that was sent out overseas by Republican businessmen, there probably is a compromise that could be worked out
exactly.
on that. I don't know. You don't know enough about the fine points of that issue.
I think that could be done, and it would be hard for the president to then veto that.
Well, I think the president.
And that's what the Republicans have to find. Those things that they can get some Democrats on board, say that this is good for the country, and then when the president vetoes it, he's going to be.
But the president doesn't need to veto it. He can make his own input into that, and hopefully they can come out with a compromise bill.
But that's how things will get done.
And let me break it down. Because as a matter of fact, in talking to Congressman Andy Harris, talking particularly about the tax, that the big difference between the administration and Republicans is that the administration wants to gain more money out of it, and Republicans want to make it neutral. Revenue neutral, but I want to. But there's right. So there, and it does look as if trade, some taxes. That it looks like that might be common ground. The other interesting sort of, I don't know the common ground exactly, but and it's in your bailiwick, Mike, which is the Keystone pipeline, and it looks as if there will be a push to get it approved. As an environmentalist, where do you see this administration going? I mean, the administration has been, to say the least, a bit coy about just whether it's going to go forward or not go forward. They didn't do it until after the election. What's your reading?
Well, most of the environmental community is strongly opposed to it, and frankly, I think probably it will be approved in some form. Whether the administration can get some trade-offs for that, I think probably is where it's going to land. I don't know. I mean, I would be surprised if the Democrats hold out forever on that. But there
are a number of Democrats that are in favor of the case.
there are.
This
there
is
are
not.
Some. Yeah,
this
no,
is not.
I understand. But most of the environmental community is opposed to it.
That's a given.
Yeah.
That's a given.
But I mean, frankly, with Senator Imhoff as chairman of the,
I was going to say,
that's a tragedy.
Well, how do you see? By the way, Senator Imhoff, who's talked about climate change as a hoax, how do you see his input and how the Republicans are going to do in terms of the Environmental Protection Agency, which has wanted to impose all kinds of restrictions in terms of carbon and coal and so on? I mean, what do you see?
I'll state this carefully. I think that Imhoff will do everything in his power to destroy the EPA, and I hope that there's enough responsible Republicans that will push back on that. I don't think the party itself will adopt the positions that Senator Imhoff has been proposing for some time.
I think the party will do everything it can to get coal production up.
That's a different question, but he
It's
wants
it's
to abolish the EPA.
It's a corollary, though.
So, Mike, I'm going to turn to you for a moment, because do you see that there are these major issues that they might be able to cut some deals on in terms of trade and I mean even the pipeline they might be able to do on taxes and that kind of thing? I mean, did you think that Republicans are going to be going there? And one of the things too that, by the way, that struck me about the president's press conference was that he did not seem to particularly conciliatory. He said he had heard from those who had voted, but he also heard from those who did not. And he seemed to be pretty tough, and he said, I'm going to move ahead with immigration, some directives if the Congress doesn't act. He seems to have, at least in that press conference, tightened up his resolve towards the Republicans.
I think part of the answer lies with what is happening with the constituency and the interest groups that will be supporting Hillary Clinton's campaign. And what do they want? And do they have some interest that coincide with the negotiations on the on the pipeline, and will they be willing to say, get Obama, go ahead and negotiate on that, because we have some interest in that? Or are there going to be the coalition is going to be saying steadfast that in order to run the effective 2016 campaign, we cannot give on the tax issue. We cannot give on some of these other issues. So I think we have to dig deeper into the coalitional structures of the two parties and their constituency bases for the 2016 presidential election. I mean, I think even politicians attempt to say, let's separate ourselves out from the next election, right? And I'm afraid that in the dynamics we're in right now, that is one of the impossibilities.
It's already started.
It's already started.
In 3 days, we don't know what those positions are. I agree with you.
Correct. That's correct. So the negotiating room, and what's interesting here, I think, is for Obama at this point, is more narrow, probably more narrow than second term, 2 years down, lame duck presidents are normally.
On the other hand, we haven't mentioned Ted Cruz and that gang who wants to undo everything that McConnell wants to do to compromise. So we'll see whether that's going to be a force.
And we have to remember that Joni Ernst ran a campaign where she wants to get rid of the EPA.
Right.
And she's one of your young Turks, right? And she's interested.
And you can't. Those new young senators who ran on those concepts cannot let those concepts be lost. They have to have. The Senate will have to have votes on those issues. There will have to be something to veto Obamacare. That will have to happen. Now, of course, nothing's going to come from it, but those things. So that Joni Ernst can go back to Iowa and say, I told you I would do what I could to get rid of Obamacare. We had the vote. It didn't get accomplished because of President B. She's got to meet those.
But they could take the party over the cliff as they almost did last time around.
No. Well, you make a promise, you have to keep it.
Well, let me break in here because you mentioned Ted Cruz. This is going to be a presidential race from now until 2016. The race is on, whether or not anybody's announced or not. So one of the questions I have certainly for John here is, what kind of impact is it going to have on Republicans as they deal with the president? Because, I mean, on the one hand, they don't want them necessarily the Democrats to take credit. On the other hand, they may get credit for things that pass, although if they do pass, they could anger their base. How do people like Ted Cruz on the one hand, or Rand Paul, and then you have the more moderate or more establishment groups. How do you see presidential politics playing into the GOP strategy over the next couple of years, particularly legislatively?
Presidential politics will play, no question. And it will be, I truly believe that it will be difficult for somebody like Cruz or Rand, who's in that battle now already, to successfully go forward. I personally believe that we will see a candidate come from the gubernatorial ranks, and the names that are mentioned are the Jeb Bushes and Romney running again are there. But there are a lot of successful governors out there, and I really believe that we're going to see one of them step forward, because they are still outside of the Washington fray, and they will have a record from their states to run on. So that if you're talking about Governor Perry, for example, from Texas, I mean, he has a record that he can run on. He doesn't have to be involved in the battle per se. And so that's why I think, so that Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, they're going to push hard, okay, because they have to. That's their job. They're senators. They're in that fight in D.C. as it takes place today. But my governors, they're not involved in that fight. They have states to run. They run those successfully. That gives them a platform to run going forward.
Okay, and by the way, I want to turn to the Eastern Shore, because one of the things that struck me is that it seems to me, particularly this last election, we're looking at a slow but fairly progressive Republican takeover. That is to say, I saw, obviously we had Norm Conway, who lost his race. I think there was Virgil Shockley, I think, down in Somerset, Somerset, I think it was.
Worcester.
Yeah, Worcester, rather. Lost his race. When we look at the Wacomico County Council, I mean, it's virtually, certainly all the contested races, those went to Republicans. We have, obviously, Bob Culver. Are we seeing the Eastern Shore make this adjustment finally to the Republican Party and its conservative tenets, as opposed to when I look particularly at somebody like, for instance, Norm Conway? He seemed almost an anomaly in this sort of sea of people who were Republicans who went to Annapolis. We still have Jim Mathias, the Democrat from state senator. But I'll talk first to you, Mike Prettle. What is that happening?
Sure. It's already happened. Yeah. I mean, it happened before this election. This was just the last remnants, unfortunately, of the Democratic strength. And O'Malley got 30% I think most of his elections. So it's been pretty much a done deal, except for people like Norm, who I think deserved to win again, and I think the county needs him desperately. But he was the last holdout, really. And Rick Pollitt was a good moderate who had been around for a while, and I think he did. I think he did a good job. But we lost the last holdouts in the Democratic ranks, if you will, on the entire Eastern Shore, and obviously we'll have to figure out a strategy to regain some of that. But I don't see anything major happening in the short-term future.
But John, what about you? I mean, obviously you're happy about the wins. I can see a smile in there.
Wacomico County has been red, and it's getting redder. And I think the issue that drove this cycle, as I stated before, is people in the Wacomico County do not see this county getting better. Their kids have to move out of Wacomico County to find good jobs. They see the farmers and the watermen being challenged by regulation from Annapolis. And wait till this phosphorus report comes out. So that they see Wacomico County sees attack from Annapolis. And they believe that the only way to turn that around is to make Wacomico County different, better for business, better for the population as a whole. And I think that's appealing to people who are sort of feeling like we're just not getting anywhere in Wacomico County. Everything Annapolis does to us makes it worse.
Michael, often do you read the demographics that way? I mean, one of the things that struck me is that yes, there's still sort of the old Eastern Shore population, but native population, but we see a lot of new people coming in. So is there some mix involved here?
I just recollect Jesse Jackson once said, first of all, I think that the Eastern Shore is part of the South, and that this is a natural development here, as with the Deep South. But Jesse Jackson once said that the South is unnaturally conservative, right? And what he meant by that, and this is part of what I think is part of what both parties have to wrestle with, is the demographic shift. We're not immune to demographic shift in Wacomico County and the Lower Eastern Shore, and that it's going to become more Hispanic American, more African American, and as John just noted, incomes remain low. There aren't that many good jobs, and those parts of the electorate are going to be pushing for answers, right? And whether the Republican Party really has those answers, right, is one of those questions. And opposition to the minimum wage is not going to raise incomes for those constituency groups, which are disproportionately low income.
You don't get more money by raising.
We can argue.
You get jobs. You make jobs available. Okay. You pay off your student loans if you have a job.
Argument.
You need jobs.
And I'm going to cut you right off there, and we'll see whether or not we're going to bring more jobs to Wacomico County under Republican rule. We've been talking with John Barkovich, long absent. He's with the Republican Wacomico County Central Committee. Also, Mike Prettle, he's with the Wacomico County Democratic Party, and Salisbury University Political Science Professor Michael Laughlin. I appreciate all you guys coming in. No doubt we will do this again. This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
This has been Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Chris Rank produces and is our audio engineer. Don Rush is your host. For podcasts, visit our website, delmarvapublicradio.net, or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast in iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on PAC 14. To view the schedule, visit the Daily Times or visit pac14.org.